Okay, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Christianity on the Spectrum. This is a podcast of around 12 years of ethnographic research into autistic Christian and ex-Christian online subcommunities, covering around 26,000 online personas and over 600 long-form interviews spanning around 12 years. This is a podcast where we like to talk about all things related to autism, Christianity, and sometimes the two of them combined, often the two of them combined for most episodes. And today will be no exception to that general norm. I get a lot of questions from people who are navigating a late diagnosis or who have just been diagnosed and who are trying to figure it out and who are going through all of the sort of weird complications that come with late diagnosis. And a lot of the questions people ask me are, is this normal? Is what I'm experiencing normal? And most of the time, the answer to those questions is yes. But the reason I keep getting asked those questions is because people don't know what normal is. People think, oh, I must be having a unique experience that only I am having. And most of the time, it turns out, no, you are having a very normal, very typical experience for someone who is going through this exact thing. So I've wanted to record this episode for a while, but I haven't had a good candidate for it until I had this exact same situation happen to me where a person who was suspecting they might have autism reached out to me directly to ask me a whole bunch of questions. And then she went through the whole process, managed to get diagnosed with autism. And I was like, okay, you should come on the podcast and we should talk about this because this will be cool. And she thankfully agreed. And so I'll just hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
All right. Hello. My alias for this episode is Barry, but you guys, if you follow me on Twitter, you know me as Motherhood Musings.
Editing John here. At the time of recording, it was Motherhood Musings. Right now, it's K Rose.
I'm a 26-year-old Catholic woman. I live in Metro Detroit. I have a husband and two sons, and I was just very recently diagnosed with autism. Kind of a mild case, but still there. It was shortly after my eldest son, who is 3, was diagnosed with autism.
Yes, many such cases, as I like to say on this podcast. That is actually the most common pathway to diagnosis for late diagnosed autistic people in my data set. The most common thing that happens is a person goes in, their child gets diagnosed with autism, and then that leads them to go, wait a second. Sometimes it's not them, sometimes it's a niece or a nephew. Sometimes it's a close personal friend, but usually what kicks off a late diagnosis is either a friend or a family member gets diagnosed or a mental health crisis. Luckily, it wasn't mental health crisis in this case. Luckily, it was your child getting diagnosed. So this is a very normal thing to happen. So before we get into your diagnosis and all that, let's talk about before you were diagnosed with autism. Now, I followed you on Twitter and on your older accounts on Twitter or your pre-locked account on Twitter, whatever it was. And I did notice you did say the word autism a few times. So was this on your radar? Did you actually suspect you were autistic before?
Not seriously until I became a mom. So I would say it's been in the back of my head for a couple of years now. I think around COVID was when TikTok really took off. And you see the pop psychology stuff on TikTok, and some of it is real and grounded in actual psychology. But I would see stuff like that and I relate to it, and then I would be like, no, I'm not going to be one of those annoying girls that has like 47 different diagnoses. Like, I already just got diagnosed with OCD. That's what's wrong with me, blah, blah, blah. So it was maybe in the back of my mind. And over time, after becoming a mom and all that, it just started becoming more and more like, okay, maybe this is a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty common. Did anyone ever ask you if you were autistic before, or was it like did anyone be like, "Hey, you're a little autistic," or was it mostly not?
Nobody ever told me directly. Apparently, this was something that was assumed about me by quite a few friends of mine. I joked about being autistic a lot just because that was kind of the humor that my husband and I had. And when I brought up it being a real thing, my friends were like, "Oh, we thought you actually were." So it was not surprising to a fair amount of people. The only time where I have been told, like, you are autistic was by my husband. And it was actually a joke. Again, we were driving home from the movie theaters after seeing one of the new Jurassic World movies. And he intentionally aggravated me by making a comment about the T-Rex in the movie, and I went on some whole spurgy rant, and he was just busting up laughing, and he was like, "You were absolutely autistic." And then come to find out years later, that's true. So,
Yes, many such cases. Yeah, so I yeah, like I said, I notice a lot of people joking about being autistic, and it introduces a lot of false positives to my database. But a really
mhm,
funny feature of it is a lot of times people joke about it in a way that they may consciously or not consciously realize is there's like a sort of a hint of truth to it.
mhm.
It is a joke, but there is something behind it where they're like, well, maybe it nicked me or something like that. Was that your general like idea of autism at the time, or was it just like nothing?
At the time, like I said, it became a growing impression. So before being a mom, I probably would say no because, like a lot of people, I didn't know a lot about autism until having a child. Like over time and spending, like you become an adult and you learn more about the world. I'm sure over time I learned more about what autism actually looks like, but it didn't the idea of masking or how it presents differently in women and stuff like that was not really information that I was privy to until I had to enter in the world with autism with my son.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know you can't do this retrospectively, and it's all like hindsight is always 2020, and it's hard to think about like how you would have thought about it at the time. But let's say you just happened upon my podcast where I went on an explanation of female expressions of autism or something like that, and you listened to that. Do you think you would have recognized yourself in it?
I think so. I, especially in motherhood, but I think it would have maybe been similar to when I would see those videos like on TikTok or something and I would relate to them, but I'd be like, oh, I don't know, like maybe, maybe not. But if I had listened to your podcast even just a year ago without any of this on my radar, I think I probably would have been like, oh, okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, when you got diagnosed with OCD, was this like a thing that you had suspected beforehand, or was this sort of an ambush diagnosis?
My OCD, was it expected?
Yeah.
Um, when it happened, no, it was not an ambush because why I sought out counseling was for moral OCD, specifically religious scrupulosity, which I had been dealing with by the time I went to therapy for about a year. And it was very distressing. And so when you have that kind of mindset, you talk to people a lot to try to figure out what's going on. OCD had been offered to me as the solution before, but if you had told me about it like in high school, I think I would have stared at you slack-jawed. What do you mean? I didn't know much about OCD then either. I didn't know about rumination-based OCD, even though I took psychology classes and all that, I was a psych major before I derailed and went into the world of theology. Um, I wasn't taught that much about OCD. It was kind of the very classic presentation of it.
Yeah, so do you think if you would have been taught about it before, you would have immediately recognized symptoms in yourself, or
Honestly, no, because I would say the most clear presentation of, or maybe not presentation, manifestation of negative effects of OCD did not happen until I became religious.
Hmm,
I
yeah.
dealt with a lot of anxiety prior to that, it was sort of nebulous. And I had, in hindsight, I can look back and see what were OCD episodes, but it did not become super like critical or derailing until I became a Christian.
Yep, yep, that is many such cases,
Yep.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah. So eventually you started to get to the point where you're like, ooh, I think the autism apple might not have fallen too far from the tree in the case of, maybe I am the tree from which the autism apple fell with my child. How did that process happen for you?
Do you mean how did I kind of make the connection?
Yes. Did you make a connection when your child was initially diagnosed?
No, believe it or not. It had been in the back of my mind, like about myself being autistic, but I did not really make the connection of myself, especially right when my son got diagnosed. Like, since I've had my diagnosis, I've not had any negative feelings about myself so far. With my son, totally different story, but I'm sure that's normal. So even though I knew my son was autistic for a long time before we got the diagnosis, I was not thinking that. The idea of the hereditary, like passing on of autism, did not occur to me, and I don't know if that was just like a self-defense thing, as like, oh, people are going to think it's this or that. So when I found out that I was autistic, it was actually very relieving to me for my son. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, this is in our family. I can help him better. Part of what's scary about having an autistic child is worrying that you won't ever be able to understand or relate to them. But he got diagnosed and then I did, and it was kind of like, oh, good. He can know that mommy understands later on in life.
Yeah, how far apart were you diagnosed from your child?
Like a couple months.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what helped you draw those initial connections then? If your child getting diagnosed wasn't it, what started making you draw those initial connections to go from like sort of I have meme autism to oh no, I think I might just actually have autism.
I started noticing the masking in public interactions. That's when it started to get a lot more obvious to me because specifically the ones where it's strangers in public, like at the grocery store or Target or whatever. I just noticed how performative it was. And it's not that I was trying to be fake, but I was just like, I'm really trying like hard in this situation. Or I go up, the ones that I find the most difficult are you go up to like a cashier and you have to order something. I had to shut my eyes every time. I couldn't do the eye contact there, and I was just like, this is interesting. So it just kept it kind of gnawing at me. I was like, why am I trying so hard? And with motherhood, I just was really struggling with the sensory input. Like it seemed to me like a lot more than your average mom. There was a brief period of time where I got a lot of breaks. Like I think last summer we had a very regular babysitter and my husband's work schedule was good, and I had just started going to the gym like 3 times a week, so they had the daycare there. So I was getting a fair amount of time away from my children for a mom who doesn't really have any outside of support outside of her husband, and I still was not dealing with the sensory input that well. And it started making me feel like there's something wrong with me. So I was like, okay, I'm getting the space, which is usually what fixes it when you're super overwhelmed with the kids. Why am I like, it didn't really matter how much break time or alone time that I got, it was still extremely overwhelming to me when they cried or screamed or whatever. And I was just like, there has to be something like going on with me. And I actually think the reason I discovered this about myself is because I was praying, like I asked God to show me who I am because I had been struggling. I've struggled my whole life with it, but really in that moment, I was struggling a lot with self-loathing, specifically around just being a really like dysregulated mom, being like kind of an inconsistent friend, just a lot of stuff about myself that autism can influence that were making me really not like myself. And I was praying one night and I was like, I don't like myself. Can you please help me see myself how you see me? And then I found out I was autistic.
Yes, God sees you as an autistic person.
Yeah.
there's there's a very funny meme that I think about a lot because it's tied to the writings of a autistic woman that I like to follow. But she shared the meme a few times. That's like, having a crush is so weird because why am I seeing this autistic guy the same way God sees him? Anyway, I think about that a lot, and it just reminded me of
Hmm.
that. But yeah, um, yeah. So that, by the way, is super common. So
Really?
um, yeah, well, like not necessarily the praying that God sees you for who you are, but
Hmm.
normally autistic women who are sort of on the cutting edge, like on the cusp of an
Hmm.
autism diagnosis, like not severely disabled by it. So I think that's where you would fall. They're usually good at balancing the plates, right? They're good at managing life and doing everything. And then having a child just turns every single dial up, and
Yeah.
all of the coping mechanisms that you previously had no longer work. And this is also why like autism diagnosis gets triggered by major life events and things like that, or moving cities or changing careers. And then you realize, oh, I think I might actually have autism. And it is actually usually the taking a break that makes you go like, oh, I think I actually have problems.
Hmm.
Where most people don't expect that, but it is usually one of the really big triggers is doing something that should work and that should help,
Hmm.
that does not help and does not work at all, and then you have to sort of go back to square one and go like, okay, why is this not working? um
Yeah.
yeah, so that's very common. That's especially normal for autistic women, especially autistic women who don't have like any other cognitive developmental issues and things like that. It's a fairly normal path to go
Hmm.
down, and a fairly normal chain of things to experience. When you did you like watch any videos or read any books or see anything or have any conversations that really triggered this in your mind where you're like, oh, I need to look into this?
My conversations with you were the real thing there. You had sent me the "Is this
How did you
autism?"
find me?
Yeah, so I found you from another mom on Twitter. She is also an autism mom, and she mentioned you, and I was talking to her about something about like the neurodiversity movement, and she brought up one of your podcast episodes. And then I saw that she was in some sort of heat with neurodiversity people on Twitter. And so I just reached out to you to talk about that. And then my son had just been diagnosed, so I was looking for people to talk to about that. And then I had like briefly brought up myself, and you just made some kind of wry comments. And what's interesting is that your comments did not surprise me. It was just building over time, like, okay. And so you and I proceeded to have a fairly long conversation for like the next couple of days. And I was relaying everything that I was telling you to my husband. He was just flabbergasted. And I was like, what? And he was like, honey, if I had known this was like your internal process all the time, I would have just told you years ago that you're autistic. Because I asked him, I was like, is this surprising? Did you know this about me? And obviously, like the answer seemed to be no. He was like, it was not the first thing that came to my mind. He did end up confiding in me that our communication styles, like when you have communication issues within a marriage, he had had times where he was like, there is some sort of disconnect here for this person. We are not speaking the same language. That was the only time he expressed to me where he was like, there's something else going on here. But as soon as I relayed to him those internal processes, he was like, oh yeah. And so it just kind of took really dissecting it to be like, oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And the big thing was going through all the stuff in my childhood and looking at it through like the autism lens and being like, oh my gosh, my whole life makes sense now.
Yeah. So you mentioned, is this autism? Was did that book help at all?
I did not read all of it just because in recent years, I've been really bad about finishing books, but when I read the first little blurb of it, there was a sentence in there that was like, I'm gonna just paraphrase it, but it was talking about how women who are high masking and also autistic seem to hit everything that they need to do socially, but they miss the mark like very slightly, and you can tell. Like it's noticeable to more neurotypical or socially aware people, but autistic women are doing everything that they're supposed to be doing socially. That resonated with me so much, especially since kind of what got me to notice things more was the really high masking in public settings. I was even noticing it with my friends. And I was just like, reflecting on that little blurb specifically, and I was like, yeah, I'm trying really hard in these social situations. I'm monitoring my eye contact. I'm thinking about conversation pacing. Oh my goodness, when I'm in group settings, when I'm talking, it dominates my mind and all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And the sort of uncanny valley socialization effect that
Hmm.
that you can never fully tease apart. Yeah, so that is basically what how you got to the point. Was when you were looking through your childhood and thinking about the things that had happened during your childhood, what sorts of things stuck out to you to be like, oh, that makes sense?
Oh my gosh, this is my favorite one. So my favorite activity to do when I was a child. I'm not going to tell you when I stopped doing this because it was a lot older than you'd think, but I'm autistic, so it's
25.
okay. Not 25, younger than that, but older than you would expect someone. But I get a pass because of the autism. My favorite thing to do when I was little was pace around in circles. I still pace in circles, but not to do this activity, obviously. And I would hold out something that had an image on it, usually a book cover, a VHS tape cover, a DVD, CD, whatever, if it had some sort of image that I liked on it. And I would verbalize these narratives out loud to myself, some sort of story based on whatever image was on the thing that I was holding. And I'd just walk around in circles, and I would do that for hours. Hours. And the older I got, the more self conscious I got about it, which I think is a fairly typical thing to happen. So I became more private about it the older I got. But when I was little, I would just do it on a whim all the time in front of my family. My dad told me a couple weeks ago that when I was a toddler and obsessed with The Land Before Time, I would walk around with my little dinosaurs, and I think I even had like a VHS cover of one of the movies. I would walk around in my little circles, and I'd be talking my baby jargon, but then they would hear me say things like Littlefoot or Sarah, like characters from the movies. And I was doing that from since I could talk and walk, apparently. And that was my preferred method of, I don't know if it was play or regulation. I don't really know how to describe that behavior, but it was something I did for a very long time. Maybe it was just processing, but that was the big one. I walked on my toes exclusively until I was 12 years old. I still pop up on my toes unconsciously. I don't know what made me stop doing it at 12. And they didn't know either, like my parents or the doctors, because I went through a bunch of physical therapy stuff for it. I got bullied a lot for the toe walking because I'm really short and small, and so they being the kids at school thought that I was doing it to be tall or whatever. And my parents, I had leg braces. There were times where I had casts on to see if it could stretch out my Achilles, because the running idea, it was idiopathic, but the running idea was that there was something like physiological going on with my ankle cords, but nothing helped. No Botox in my ankle cords, the casts, nothing like that. So I was a toe walker exclusively until around like 6th grade. I figured it out. Couldn't tell you what. Maybe the social pressure got to me, and I just was like, okay, down I go. But I still do it. Usually, if I do it the most in my basement because the floor is always cold in there, so I pop up my toes. If I'm making dinner and the kids are screaming, I'm on my toes because I'm stressed, and so I just need to change the sensory input there. I had a hell of a time socializing all throughout my life, especially as a child. It's easier now as an adult because I have Christian morals that kind of have turned into like a textbook for social rules in my head that make it easier for me to make friends. But as a child, I was fairly introverted, but I always still did have some social inclination. Something I found out that was really common for women who were, I know high functioning is not the term that's in vogue. Do you want me
Just
to
use it.
just say
Just
it?
use it.
Okay.
High functioning is fine. Like
Okay.
it, everyone knows what you mean.
Yeah. So for high functioning and high masking autistic women, I learned that it was very common to have a social dynamic with other girls where you hyper focused on one particular girl. Like that was going to be your best friend for whatever reason. And her friends would be your friends. It was like a serial monogamy type deal. When I learned that that was common for autistic women, my jaw hit the floor because that was my entire childhood. And really into adolescence, I would latch on to particular girls. I would want to be her best friend. She would say that I was a copycat or too clingy. Our friendship would fall out of vogue after some time. I never really kept a friend for very long, um, which I know is also common.
Yes,
But
in many such cases.
yeah, many such cases, like I could make them okay. I've always struggled to make them, but maintaining them obviously is where it ends up falling apart in the end. Lots of you're too clingy, you're too weird, you're a copycat. And the kinds of friends that I sought out, I, upon reflecting, were probably girls that I really wanted to be like. Like it probably had less to do with them being personally, if how do I want to say this? It probably had less to do with how they would be a friend to me than me wanting to be close to them and to be like them. And when that is the basis of a lot of your friendships, that's hard in itself. So I had a time, and it didn't get easier in college. It just was harder for different reasons. My first semester of college, oh my goodness, I cried every single day because I could not make friends for like the first couple months. It was so hard. There was none of that forced proximity there. My roommate and I were like close, but we were not best friend material. So I had all the social issues throughout there. I did great in school. School was easy. I didn't have to study. Even in college, I didn't. I think college is when I had to start studying for stuff, but not super hard. So I had a lot of like the typical girl autism stuff going on.
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. So when you started talking to me and you started figuring stuff out and going, oh, ooh, oh, um, what was this experience like for you? Can you just sort of describe what was going on inside your head while this was happening?
I think I immediately recognized that a prayer was being answered, so there was thankfulness for that. But also, it was very much epiphany like because I started applying everything in my life to that lens and learning more about it and just being like, oh my gosh, this makes sense. So it was a lot of relief. And to this day, relief remains the dominant feeling there. I haven't really, at least not yet, had a moment of like anger or like, oh, why does it have to be this way? Because from my perspective, I already had all the struggles, all the issues are already there. I just have the name for it now. Because before it was all these like disjointed problems, like, oh, I have OCD. Oh, I was just super weird. I don't know why I was like that when I was a kid. Why was I so rude? Oh, that was something I forgot to mention. I frequently got the rude accusations, bad tone, very serious, etc. Typical girl autism type stuff. And just looking back on that, instead of being so hard on myself about it, I got to have compassion for myself, which is what I
Yeah.
really needed to have.
Do you know what the Rumpelstiltskin effect is?
I probably should, but no.
It is a effect in psychology where having a diagnosis allows you to unlock stuff. So it's called the Rumpelstiltskin effect because it's based on the fairy tale of Rumpelstiltskin. For those not familiar with your German folklore, I'll give you a brief rundown. Basically, a girl trades the ability to turn flax into gold, and she's like, hell yeah, this rocks. She makes a deal with a short man to be able to do it, and he's like, I'm going to come back and take your firstborn unless you can guess my name. And she sort of agonizes about this, and no one knows what his name is, and she can't guess it. And then finally she figures it out. And then she figures it out, and she feels happy that she's finally found the name for this really weird, obscure short man that's been plaguing her life and making everything worse. And now that she knows what the name is, she can actually deal with the problem. And that is the effect that I think most autistic women who are late diagnosed start to feel, where it's like, oh, okay. I often hear people say things like, I always thought I was defective and there was something wrong with me, and then I realized, oh, like a lot of my sort of deepest insecurities about my personality can probably be explained by a neurodevelopmental disorder and not
Hmm.
just like me not trying hard enough. And in that there is a lot of, like you said, self-compassion and grace, to be like, oh, I was trying my hardest, and this was not because I was running up against the hard barriers of neurology, not just my unwillingness to make basic changes in my life. And
Hmm.
that in and of itself can be very helpful and very freeing. I think it can get taken to a sort of unhealthy extent, right? Where you can definitely run too far with that. But most people, when they first get diagnosed, are not in any danger of that.
Hmm.
They have hard overcorrected on the self-hatred side of things. And getting a diagnosis usually comes with an enormous amount of relief. One of the ways I describe it is it's like getting an encryption key to your past, where
Hmm.
before your past experiences are kind of marred in this very weird soup that you can't quite understand. And you're like, I was making friends, but now I don't have any friends. I don't know what I keep doing, but I can make a friend for like 6 months, and then it
Hmm.
breaks down. I don't know why this happens. I don't know how this happens. I don't get it, but I know it keeps happening. Why is this happening? And then come along with this. Oh, you have a neurodevelopmental disorder that specifically impacts the part of your brain that deal with these things. And you go, oh, okay, cool. And what happens usually is like, I call it the 6 month epiphany cycle. Because it's like, you go through your life thinking, oh, is this autism? And the answer is
Hmm.
almost certainly yes. It's not all autism, it's not just
Hmm.
autism, but because autism is a pervasive neurodevelopmental disorder, it has its fingers on almost everything in your life. And being able to be like, oh, that was the part where I was actually being a dick and I shouldn't have. And
Hmm.
that was the part where I was running up against the hard limits of neurology that I just didn't know I was running up against. And I assumed it was just some sort of deep personality flaw that I had yet to
Yeah.
deal with. So yeah, you are you still having those epiphanies? Does that still happen?
Yes, I think I've gotten a good chunk of them out of the way. I think that one specifically, the example of the rudeness or the social faux pas there, I think that one has been the most relieving because honestly, if you look back, it kind of feels like I'm talking about two different people, pre-Christianity and post-Christianity, because my social behavior changed so much. I became very kind of keep sweet and very self-sacrificial, just wishy-washy. Major people-pleasing tendencies came up, which I'm going to have to deal with at some point. But before it was like, you're too blunt, you're too rude, you have attitude problems and stuff. And I would talk to my family about this because they had the same thought. It's like, after you came to faith, you became a totally different person. And part of that obviously is sanctification of the Holy Spirit. But also, I got access to a set of rules that I could follow pretty rigidly. And when I would talk to my family, they'd be like, "Why were you like that?" And it was always, "I don't know." And it over time it became, I started to realize a lot of like the iciness was like a self-defense mechanism. I would tell them, I was like, "I really felt uncomfortable in a lot of these social situations, but I didn't know why." That was as far as I got before getting a diagnosis or seeing it through autism. It was, I felt uncomfortable in these situations for whatever reason, and how I defended myself or kept myself comfortable was by having an icy demeanor, keeping people at arm's length, being just matter of fact, which being matter of fact does not always have anything to do with being uncomfortable. That was just how I was. But it was very relieving to look back and be like, "Oh, I wasn't just some evil little girl. Like, I I had quote unquote problems." And when I got in trouble for like my attitude, I would not understand why. It was the one thing that my parents could not get like me to resolve. I was a very good kid. I've always been rules based, and so I didn't like getting in trouble. That was the one thing that they were not able to discipline out of me. They would send me to my room, they would take stuff away. The only thing they didn't take away was my books, which were the great love of my life. And they refused to do that to me because that was like the only thing I cared about as a child, which really, I don't know why these people didn't notice things more. Like, there's so many things about me as a child where I'm like, "Huh, really?" Even in the process of getting my diagnosis, my assessor was like, "They should have caught this when you were a child, but because you were a girl and you didn't have any developmental delays with your language or anything like that, you just got passed over," which I understand now in hindsight. But yeah, just, I wasn't an evil little girl. I was just autistic.
Obviously, you're a Catholic and not the true religion of Calvinism, where you could
Oh,
be like,
I was.
I was an evil girl."
Hey, I did have a Calvinist phase. I was there.
Hell yeah, brother!
I was
Didn't
I
we
was
all?
there. We went
That's
there.
yeah, yeah, very classic autism thing to have a Calvinist
Yeah.
face. Yeah,
Yes.
but yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, going through this whole process, a big thing that people are often worried about is that the diagnosis is going to become a crutch, or it's going to become an excuse to not do hard things or something like that. Is that something that you are concerned with? Is that something you think about, or is that just like not something that has ever crossed your mind?
No, I think it could be a problem for people who are not as hard on themselves as I am. I like to think that I'm not that hard on myself, but I hear it from every single person in my life that I am, so I know it's true. I often hear people talk about, oh, they don't like labels. They, especially with regards to their children, they're like, "Oh, I thought this about my child, but I didn't want to seek it out because I didn't want it to limit them or something like that." And just for me, I don't see it that way at all. I see it more how you described it, as like an encryption key. I feel like I am able to recognize reality more now. And so I won't push myself beyond. Obviously, I'm going to have to learn through trial and error what is too much and what is not. That's a lifelong thing. But it won't be so frustrating if something is hard. If I, for whatever reason, am having a really hard time with the kids screaming, I'm not a horrible evil person. I just need to put in my AirPods and listen to music and do my thing. Go walk in my circles around my kitchen. It helps. Those breathing techniques helped, but you know what helps more is walking in my circles in my kitchen. And so it just, I do not see it becoming a crutch for myself. I'm too self-aware of a person. Obviously, I am not immune to such things, but I don't see it
Yeah.
becoming a crutch for me.
I don't see it becoming a crutch for the vast majority of autistic people that I deal with. I see it becoming a crutch for certain ones,
Yeah.
and there are a lot of toxic elements to the neurodiversity movement where they
Hmm.
sort of encourage you to make it a crutch, but I don't see it that way at all. And I don't think that a lot of the online, unmask everything. It doesn't matter about other people's feelings really resonates with most Christians.
I'm
um,
not doing that. I'm sorry. I'm not
yeah,
dropping the mask completely.
yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
doing that.
yeah. The mask is good to a large extent, but I often just explain this isn't a crutch. It is a self-aware. It is increased self-awareness. It allows you
Hmm.
to identify the problems that you're actually having and not misidentify them as something else. Like
Hmm.
there's the famous Sun Tzu quote: "If you know your enemy and yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. And if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle." And in this case, autism is simultaneously yourself and the enemy. So
Yeah.
so you do need to understand it, and you do need to understand both, so that you can properly build accurate mechanisms for dealing with the problems that you will have if you have autism. And
Hmm.
it's look, this is a disability. This is something that you're going to have to deal with. Everyone would look at you as if you had four eyes, if or as if you had, like, everyone would look at you like you were insane if you
Hmm.
said, "Oh, don't say you have a broken leg. You don't really have a broken leg." Right?
Yeah.
Like everyone goes like, "No, you have a broken leg that allows you to identify the problem, that your bone is broken, and then it allows you to find the solution, which is splint your leg so your bone can refuse and reheal." And if you think about your autism diagnosis like that, like this is a tool to help you understand what's going on with you and help you fix the things that you need to fix. It can be an amazing tool to do that, and it is often the first step to not needing a crutch.
Yeah.
uh, one of the one of the very frustrating things that I don't think a lot of people understand is that not having a diagnosis and not knowing what's actually going on makes you need significantly more crutches of other types. And a lot of times these crutches are not good crutches. These crutches are
Hmm.
things like alcohol or
Hmm.
or substance abuse of various forms, or like addiction to various things.
Hmm.
These are the types of crutches that you actually develop if you don't
Hmm.
have the awareness to know what the problems that you're actually dealing with are, because you can't switch autism off. You can't just
Hmm.
wish it away. It's neurodevelopmental. And while you can do a lot of things to improve your symptoms, and while you can do a lot of things to get better at stuff and improve with people and improve your social skills and whatnot, at the end of the day, you're going to hit the hard limits of neurology at some point, and you need some tool to be able to tell you where you're hitting those limits, if you're close to hitting those limits, and what you're supposed to do with it. So, anyway,
Hmm.
I just thought I'd throw that out there because a
Hmm.
lot of people have the question, like, oh no, what if this becomes a crutch? It's like, well, if you are worried about it being a crutch, it will not become a crutch to you because you were
Hmm.
actively concerned about not making it that.
Hmm.
So don't worry. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
So you got to a point where you're like, okay, I'm pretty sure I have this. Did you tell your family and friends?
I told more friends than family.
I
The
mean, you told your
only
husband, obviously.
Yes, yes, he was, of course. No, I was hiding all of this. No, can you imagine? No, he obviously was the first person to know. I was more open about it with friends because honestly, I they see me in a social light more than my family, and so I probably talk to my friends more than my family, so they are more privy to my life in a lot of ways. I did not tell anybody officially until after I got the diagnosis because I did not want to give some sort of false, like, this is a thing, and then it turned out to not be a thing. But the only family that I've told is my dad and my stepmom, I believe, and my brother. I just recently told my brother. I think that's it in terms of family outside of my husband. Most of my friends know though, and they're not
How
surprised.
how did those conversations go down?
Has been not super surprised. It just kind of became accepted. Honestly, he became of the opinion that I did not even need to have an official assessment, but because I am very literal and I like categories and boxes, I was like, no, I need the box. Put me in the box, please. I need to know if this is a real thing. My dad was not super convinced. He wasn't against it, but he was like, I don't know, I'm not convinced. Until I got my report and he read over it, he was like, okay, I still think that you're at most borderline, but I'm not a professional. Obviously, there's something to this. When I told my brother, he was just like, oh, why did you seek that out? And I told him a bunch of stuff, and I was like, it's because of my son, and blah, 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 blah. I thought about it for a couple of years. And he was just kind of like, okay, cool. I hope that gave you the clarity that you needed. But the friends were the people where that would kind of be more relevant because I interact with them more. The vast majority of them were not surprised, much to my surprise about that. They were just like, okay, cool. I kind of saw that. Like, thanks, guys. Like, nobody could have told me when I was crashing out about my son for 2 years.
Oh man. Yeah, yeah. So like that's fairly normal. Usually people like there are two sorts of camps of reaction. So with family members, it depends how much they know about autism. A lot of
Yeah,
families think like the only autism that exists is ASD3, and so you
yeah.
tell them I have autism and they go, "No, no, you don't. You were smart as a kid. You had so much
Mm-hmm.
promise. Look at how good you're doing in life." However, if they know about autism, they're like, "Yeah, you haven't." So that's usually how it goes down. Yeah, I talk to people who get late diagnosed and they're in a family who already have a bunch of nieces and nephews diagnosed, and they go, "Oh yeah, I think I'm autistic," and they're like, "Yeah, and Grandpa obviously is, and he's who you got
Yeah,
it." Is like a really big thing that happens a lot. But for friends, most of the time, friends are like, once you explain it to them, they go, "Yeah, that makes sense."
yeah,
A very common thing, especially if they know what autism is they go like, "Yeah, I suspected that. I didn't know how to really bring it up with you."
yes. My friend who was a psych nurse, she was the first IRL not online friend that I told. And I had been talking to her about my son and all that. And I told her before I got an official diagnosis that I was going to go through the process. She was like, yeah, I noticed some things about you, especially after you started talking to me about your son, but I didn't want it to affect our friendship, so I didn't say anything. And I was like, I wouldn't have been offended, but okay. And I was like, really? Like, how did you pick up on that? And she just goes, I'm a psych nurse. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, many such cases. Anyone knows me IRL, I usually have the conversation pretty directly with them like, "I'm not a professional. I cannot diagnose you.
Yeah.
However, I do nothing with my life other than talk to autistic people and study them, and I'm just saying it's worth looking into." I think
Yeah.
after you had talked to me for a few days, I was just like,
Yeah.
"Okay, just get assessed. You We already know what the answer is going to be. You're going to be on like I believe I said you either will be or will be just below the criteria, where
Yeah.
you are either going to be an edge case that goes just above or just below, but because you have an autistic child, I would say you're
Hmm.
going to be above the line
Yeah.
for their threshold. And I believe that's pretty much what happened.
Yes, that was exactly what happened. My son was the deciding, excuse me, factor in my diagnosis.
Yeah. So you went for the assessment, and how did that assessment go?
It was good. It was grueling. That recent article that came out where some lady was talking about how she got a diagnosis in an hour. I don't know how that happened to her because I went through the same process my son did, but a little more intensely. So I was assessed by the same clinician who did my son's assessment. I was very surprised by that. It was a big blessing, honestly, because I know how difficult it can be for adults, especially women, to get diagnosed. Just to get seen by a clinician is often really hard, to have insurance line up for them. I was able to be assessed by the same guy who assessed my son. So I already had some sort of rapport with him. Like I'd already talked to him for a couple of hours at that point in my life. So I felt comfortable with him. I submitted a bunch of online stuff. I had to do the sensory profile. I did like an hour and a half long video call with him. It would have been in person, but it's easier for video call with me and the kids. Um, where we went over intake. Then I went in for my in-person assessment. I did the ADOS, the Wechsler, all that. It took a long time. He threw in a attention management test in there as well, just to test for ADHD tendencies that he was like, I just want to rule this out. So it was extremely thorough. I was there for a long time and I was tired afterwards.
Yep. Yeah, and the results came back with you have autism
Hmm.
in like ASD1, low support needs, I'm guessing, or no support
Yeah.
needs. I don't know
Um,
how they do it in the States.
on my report, I did not get a level assignment actually. I can pull up what he put because I have a screenshot of it. He did put in his diagnostic impression autism spectrum disorder, and there were a couple other things in there with accompanying sensory differences, with associated executive functioning difficulties, with associated anxiety, with OCD tendencies. And when we did the call going over my report, he says that he had wished that he'd put something about no developmental delay or cognitive issues or anything like that. That I essentially that I had sufficient intellectual capacity. He wishes that he had added something in there with that. But that was like the final line of the report.
Yep, that is completely unsurprising based on my conversations with you. And it was
Yes.
like, especially like normally when people with your case and history come to me and ask me, I say, I'm not entirely sure. I think you're borderline. You know, you never know with clinicians. There are
Mhm.
all sorts of subjective factors that I just can't tell in online. Like that's it's
Mhm.
just not. There's a reason these assessments are done in person, and you're just
Yeah.
talking to me, and like I don't know you that well. Blah blah blah
Mhm.
blah. And then I usually, but like you, if I go
Mhm.
like, but there's proof of this, or if they have
Yeah.
a parent, or if they have a parent with a diagnosis, or like brothers or sisters with diagnoses, or nieces and nephews with diagnoses, I go like, okay, that increases the probability of this being
Yeah.
a thing to above the threshold. So that makes sense. How did it feel to for someone to write down on a piece of paper that you had autism?
Relief, like I said, I knew the answer and it finally checked the box for me because it's like you're sitting there with your pen poised, ready to sign. And my brain was like, I cannot say with certainty that this is true until I receive this report saying it, even though I know it's true. And so I got to just check the box after that. It wasn't surprising to me in any way at that point. So I was just like, good, we have it. And obviously, when you're an adult, like, what does the diagnosis do for you? He gave me a bunch of recommendations, like personal recommendations of things that I could do that I might take him up on. But it is, I think it's going to be the biggest gift to my motherhood, honestly, because if it's affecting my motherhood the most, which it was, which is what led me to be so distressed in my daily life, it's going to help me so much just to know that about myself and to seek out information that can help me directly with that. And I'm already so much better of a mom knowing that about myself and using things that are actually going to help me, like regulating by walking in my circles, just getting over myself and putting in the music. I didn't really have a big problem with that anyway, but now I know, no, this really helps me. And so I've already made miles of progress in my personal issues just from having this happen to me.
Yeah. Do you ever get imposter syndrome? Like, do you ever go like, oh, maybe I have fake autism?
Yes, I still do. I'm sure I always will because yeah, I am married. I do have children. I do have pretty easy functioning like in my daily life. When I was getting assessed, even with my clinician knowing everything about masking and how women present in particular. he was talking about how my son was the deciding factor because of how well I presented myself and how I was able to get married and I have friendships that I do maintain. And those are things that can be very difficult for autistic adults. And usually, what causes them to seek out a diagnosis that is clinically significant is that they're having major life milestones put off or frustrated by their autism in a way. And I have managed to get to a point in my life where there's not that much support that's needed. Like, I'm on a medication to manage my anxiety, and that is the main thing. And I'm learning coping strategies for autistic adults in particular. And that is going to be the main thing for helping me as a mom. And even with my OCD, learning things that are going to help the rumination outside of strictly OCD techniques. And so I don't have a lot of the struggles, and I have an autistic child who goes to ABA therapy and occupational therapy and speech therapy every weekday, and I see those children there, and because he's 3, he's so young, he's in the early intervention one. A lot of those kids, if they're in early intervention, they're pretty severely disabled. And even my son, like, he's not having as many meltdowns as a lot of kids there, and I'm just like, these children are really struggling and suffering. And I have the same disorder that they do, technically, but I am a married woman who functions fine. I'm gonna go to the gym after dropping him off, and I'm gonna do my workout, and I'm gonna go to the mall with my other son afterwards and have a totally fine day. And I don't have to worry about any of that for myself. And I will talk to, or I will see other people who are autistic adults who are maybe higher support needs or lower functioning, or they struggle more with stuff. Like, they talk about recovery after social interactions. I don't relate to the recovery aspect as much as some autistic adults. So I'm like, I don't have this thing where I have to like lay in bed in the quiet after seeing my friends. I actually feel quite refreshed a lot of the time afterwards. Maybe I don't have as many social deficiencies as I thought I did, and all yada yada yada, all this
That's
stuff.
just extroversion.
Yeah. But
That
I'm
that
not
doesn't
I'm
actually have a
not
lot to do with autism.
the thing is I'm not extroverted. I don't consider myself extroverted. But I'm very particular about my friends and who I spend time with. So maybe I am particularly extroverted. I don't know. Maybe I am technically so, but it's marred by autism. Who knows? Who knows what I
Yeah,
am?
I have no idea. But like, yeah, like there are many autistic people who enjoy social relationships. I'll
Yes.
just say
Yeah.
that. Like, I don't think that bars you from that. But yeah, no, I think I get this question all the time. People are like, I am always like, maybe I have fake autism. Like maybe I don't actually have it. And it's like, no, you're always going to feel that way. People, a lot of people think, especially if they're on a long diagnostic wait list, where they're like, I'm going to get diagnosed and it's going to solve this problem for me. And I'm honestly like, no, it's not. What it's
No.
going to do for you is it's going to just make you go, well, what if I was faking it for the doctor? Like,
Yeah.
what if, I wasn't really, your brain will come up with a million rationalizations. And at a certain point, you just got to bite the bullet
Hmm.
and accept it. And there's not really a whole lot more you can do other than that. Yeah. So it's, I mean, it's a tough line to hold. The thing that I always say is it's just like, yeah, you have a mild disability. Uh,
Yeah.
that still means it's a disability. It's also a mild one. It's like
Yeah.
you have poor vision and we don't have glasses. You might not be blind, but you have poor vision and you can still do stuff that most people can do, but you're going to come up against some hard limits at certain points, and you just need to acknowledge that, and it's not a big deal, and you don't need to pretend you're more blind than you are. You don't need to like tell yourself that you're not vision impaired because you can still see things. Like, this is not how any of this works. You
Hmm.
have a mild disability, and mild disabilities can still cause a lot of issues, and the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can identify what's causing it, come up with solutions, and actually just get on with living your life as best as you can. So yeah, do you want to? Do you have anything else that you would like to share about this experience or process for you?
Let me see if I have anything in my notes. I can't think of anything specific. That example you gave of the vision is really funny. They can't see this, but I am wearing glasses, so that is particularly salient. And it actually helps me quite a bit that you said that because I don't, it's not that I have an aversion to considering myself disabled. I just feel that it is unfair to say that because I'm like, well, I don't have intellectual disability. I can do a lot of things. But there are a lot of things that I struggle to do or can't do that I either have not accepted yet or that I have just not realized yet are a result of my neurodevelopmental disability. And so I'm gonna hit that wall a couple of times.
Yeah, and it's like we don't have autism glasses yet. So
Yeah.
because we don't have autism glasses, you're going to hit these limits, and it's not going to be fun when you do, and it doesn't make any sense to pretend like you're not hitting these limits when you very obviously are.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's sort of, I mean, I this one works particularly well on Christians, but I often ask them like, is this a pride thing for you? Like, is this what's actually going on, that you're too proud to admit that you might have some dependency issues, that you might
Mhm.
have to rely on other people? Is this actually you caring about, not wanting to overshadow more severely disabled people, or is this also maybe a little bit of a pride thing? Is this something where you are letting your pride get in the way of letting other people help you, or getting yourself the help that you actually need? Maybe consider that.
Mm.
Is one that I hit people a lot with. Pride is a sin, folks, and not accepting your limitations and
Mhm.
pretending they don't exist, and pretending that you are fine when you are not, is pride. Don't do it.
Don't
Anyway,
do
on
it.
that note, on that note, I'm John. You can email me, christianityonthespectrum@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at christianityon, where if you are thinking about getting a diagnosis or wondering about it, like Barry, you can DM me or just get in my comments and tell me that you'd like to DM me or email me, and I will happily walk you through this process. I have done this hundreds of times at this point in my life. I will also tell you if I don't think you're autistic. So, yeah, I cannot diagnose you. I do not attempt to diagnose you. I will not attempt to diagnose you. Um, I will just help you figure out if this is something that is worth your time pursuing, or whether it's not worth your time pursuing. So that's where you can find me. You can also find me on Blue Sky at Christianity On. You can find me on Substack at Christianity On. And my Substack name is Dispatches from the Autism Wars. Uh, where can the good folks of this podcast find you?
You can find me at on Twitter, or more officially known as X.com. I
Oh,
like to
right.
post
Yeah.
about, yeah, it's technically X. I like to post about motherhood, but I also have a lot of other interests. You will notice me cycle through my interests and various different aspects of my personality on my profile. So if you're interested in watching an autistic Christian woman in real time, you can follow me there. I'm on there frequently. And
Also, you
if
play
there's,
World of Warcraft. How
yes,
did they
I
not?
do.
How did that not flag?
I don't know. I was a little girl and I was obsessed with my dinosaurs. My favorite movie when I was 5 years old was Jurassic Park. I was a horse girl. I did horseback riding until I was 14. I had an 80s phase in eighth grade. I had all sorts of things going on with me. I was weird,
You
okay?
play
Like,
World
I
of
was,
Warcraft.
yes, I played World of Warcraft. I was talking to my husband. And I was like, oh, I like Lord of the Rings, but I'm not super into it. I guess that's a point against me for autism. And as I was talking, I go, I don't know. I guess I've just always been more into like the World of Warcraft type lore. And then I paused and we looked at each other and I was like, that's worse, isn't it? And he was like, yes, honey, it's worse.
That's way worse.
That's way
Lord
worse.
of the
So,
Rings
yes.
is at least Lord of the Rings is at least like a culturally salient piece of media that everyone knows about.
Oh, everyone knows World of Warcraft from that friggin' what South Park episode of that
Yeah,
loser. Like
and they
that's
certainly
me
don't know
apparently.
lore, no World of Warcraft lore or anything about it. But yeah, anyway, um, yeah, cool. The podcast is raising money for the Against Malaria Foundation. Link in the description. It buys malaria nets, which prevent malaria, which prevent people from dying of malaria, which is a good thing. So, if you would like to support this podcast or any of my work, or you would like to say thank you or do anything like that, please consider donating to the Against Malaria Foundation. It genuinely helps motivate me to do this work. I feel great when people donate, and it makes me continue want to do this. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. I'll see you later.